The Sorcerer Supreme had walked through countless dimensions, each layered with its own logic, its own physics, its own mysteries. But nothing had ever struck Stephen Strange with such immediate, suffocating hostility as the Immaterium. It began with a simple spell. One moment, he stood in the ruins of a collapsing nexus, weaving a containment lattice of the seven suns to seal Dormammu's intrusion into his world. The next, the spell twisted, not failed, not inverted, but mutated, as if some unseen hand reached into its runes and rearranged them like crude toys. Strange felt time invert, space curl, and causality buckle. The world dissolved into colors no spectrum could name. Then he opened his eyes and realized he was somewhere he should not exist. The warp. A psychic sea of pure emotion, madness, and unfiltered sentience pressed in on him like a living storm. It was not a place, not truly. It was screaming consciousness given form. Shapes shifted, faces emerged from nowhere. Entire landscapes rose from the tides and collapsed seconds later. Voices whispered in languages he didn't understand, yet somehow fully comprehended. Anguish, rage, hunger, ecstasy, despair. All of it swirled around him like a tide, eager to consume him. Strange's first instinct was to raise the shield of the Seraphim, a radiant disk of golden arcana. The warp reacted immediately. Its surface rippled, warped, and cracked. Tendrils of psychic filth hissed against the barrier like acid trying to corrode holy metal. Strange reinforced the spell, surprised by how alive the pressure felt. Magic never fought back like this in his home dimension. "I am not welcome here," he murmured. The Immaterium answered, not in words, but in the sudden awareness of presence. 4 of them, each vast beyond comprehension, older than memory, their forms shifting and fracturing so quickly the mind could not retain their true shapes. They did not speak, they simply observed, their collective attention like the gaze of God staring down at an insect that somehow wandered into their realm. He felt it, recognition mixed with curiosity, and then hostility. The warp did not merely contain daemons, it was ruled by them, ruled by entities whose essence fed on thought and emotion. Here, Strange's disciplined magic, his ordered spell work, his dimensional constructs, all of it offended the very medium he floated within. The warp wanted to reject him. His cloak fluttered, animated with urgency, pulling him toward thin threads of stability, like cracks in a storm where a ship might escape drowning waves. Strange followed its pull, levitating as broken memories, visions, and psychic fragments whipped past him. Entire lifetimes of suffering flashed around him. Wars fought by billions, prayers screamed into voids, dying minds burning like lanterns as they fed this realm's infinite hunger. This is a psychic domain, Strange realized, a dimension formed by collective thought. No wonder his spells flickered. They were structured, geometric, flowing from disciplines born from cosmic consistency. Here, consistency was a lie, and lies could become truth if enough souls believed them. He sensed the border of reality, a fragile membrane separating this nightmare sea from what felt like a physical universe beyond. Real space. That membrane thinned, stretched, trembled as demonic silhouettes gathered behind him. Wings of bone and void, tendrils of despair, horned shapes carved from the nightmares of entire civilizations. They were closing in. The warp yearned to devour him entirely.
Strange brought his hands together. Magic flared. Siddhartha's veil unfold. A sphere of shimmering blue exploded outward, pushing the demons back just enough to give him a window. He surged toward the membrane of reality, felt his atoms strain, his mind stretch, his soul nearly peel from his body. The warp screamed in fury. One last surge threw him through a crack of light. And he fell. He struck solid ground, hard enough to crack stone. Breathing heavily, he pushed himself upright, his cloak steadying him. He blinked against the harsh glare of twin suns beating down from an oppressive sky. Not Earth, not any world he recognized. A massive statue towered over him, an armored figure with a stern divine face holding a flaming sword. At its feet, hundreds of citizens knelt in prayer. A shrine world, a place of worship. Strange sensed something else. A fortified presence, a militaristic architecture, an atmosphere of fanaticism embedded into the very stone. Then someone screamed. Witchcraft! A sorcerer descends from the sky! Guards surged into view, men in flak armor, wielding rifles glowing with red power cells. Their eyes were wide with fear and fanaticism. Strange raised his hands in peace. I mean no harm. The guards opened fire. Bolts of blazing red light tore toward him. Strange instinctively conjured a ward, deflecting the blasts into the sky. The people scattered, terrified. The guards shouted into their vox links, calling for reinforcements, screaming of psychic invasion. Strange tried again. Please, I'm not here to... More gunfire. More panic. He realized then, this world feared psychic power, feared sorcery, feared anything resembling the warp he had just escaped. His appearance had triggered a crisis. Strange levitated above the shrine plaza, catching falling debris with a gesture, shielding civilians from their own collapsing structures. His restraint only heightened Imperial confusion. Then, a new sound split the air, low, thunderous, like a cathedral bell carved from adamantium. Strange turned. Silver-armored giants descended from the sky, shimmering with psychic wards, purity seals fluttering. Their armor bore sigils of banishment and scripture. Their presence radiated disciplined psychic might. The Grey Knights. They landed with the weight of judgment itself, halberds crackling with power. Their leader pointed at Strange. Identify yourself, entity. Strange floated calmly, cloak settling behind him. I am Dr. Stephen Strange, and I fear I am very far from home. Every psychic sense in the plaza tightened. The Grey Knights read his aura, felt no demonic taint, no malice, no corruption. But they also felt something impossible. An unbound sorcerer, untouched by the warp. A threat, a miracle, a problem. The Imperium did not know what to make of him. The warp, however, already had.
The Grey Knights formed a semicircle around Dr. Strange, their halberds glowing with psychic fire. Their armor hummed, not mechanically but spiritually, as if prayer and psychic resonance were woven into the steel itself. Every purity seal, every etched sigil, radiated disciplined, weaponized faith. Strange could feel it washing over him, an aura of hostility wrapped in absolute conviction. These were not simple soldiers. They were psychic warriors trained specifically to destroy witches, sorcerers, and daemons, and he had just fallen out of the sky in a blaze of energy. Hardly an ideal introduction. The squad leader stepped forward, his voice amplified through helmet vox grills. You stand upon sanctified ground, unknown psyker. State your allegiance. Identify your patron. Show proof you are not of the warp's corruption. Strange floated to the ground, lowering his hands to appear non-threatening. I already told you, I'm not from here. I'm a sorcerer, yes, but not one born of this psychic dimension you call the warp. I don't serve daemons. I don't serve anything. Several knights raised their halberds another inch. Free psychers, unsanctioned witches in the imperial lexicon, were as dangerous as daemons in their eyes. Strange continued, choosing his words carefully. If anything, I serve the balance between realms. I only came here by accident, and I intend no harm. His calm demeanor unnerved the Grey Knights more than hostility would have. The leader tilted his head. Your aura is unlike any we have encountered. It is a structured, self-contained. Your power does not bleed into the Immaterium. Strange saw their confusion. To them, psychic power was the warp, sorcery, mutation, daemonic temptation, a single system of belief. But his magic did not originate from emotion or psychic resonance. It was learned, disciplined, borrowed from extra-dimensional entities through pacts of honor, not corruption. He lifted one hand slowly, conjuring a small, controlled sphere of eldritch light. It hovered in his palm like a crystalline ember. I draw energy from structured realms, ordered dimensions, places of symmetry and purpose, not from the tides of madness you call the warp. The reaction was instant and volatile. The Grey Knights recoiled, not in fear, but in recognition of something unprecedented. One murmured through the vox, "Impossible. His power does not register at all. No demonic resonance, no psychic bleed." Another, "Not even the nulls read this cleanly." The leader considered Strange with a mixture of awe and threat. "Your existence defies imperial doctrine. Therefore, by order of the Ordo Malleus, you will accompany us to Titan for interrogation and classification." Strange's shoulders tightened. "Interrogation? Classification? I don't submit to chains." "It is not a request." Energy crackled along their halberds. Strange realized he only had two choices: allow himself to be taken by an extremist military order he did not understand, or defend himself and escalate a conflict he did not want. He exhaled. "If you want to talk, we'll talk, but I won't be shackled, probed, or imprisoned. That's not how I handle diplomacy." The air thickened. The Grey Knights did not tolerate negotiation, not with witches, not with unknowns, not with anything that could be a threat. The leader raised his halberd. "Then we will take you by force." The attack was instantaneous. The knights moved with superhuman speed, their armor enhancing their reflexes far beyond human capability. Psychic fire arced from their weapons, forming a lattice of anti-demonic energy designed to rip sorcerers apart. Strange's hands moved faster. Mandala sigils exploded around him as golden shields intercepted the attacks. Bolts of psychic annihilation shattered harmlessly against his wards. The plaza beneath them cracked, the stone melting from redirected heat. Strange countered, but carefully. He didn't strike to kill. Instead, he summoned the winds of Watum, a rotating barrier that pushed the knights back without harming them. Several skidded across the plaza, gouging trenches in the stone. The leader braced himself, armor grinding. "He resists banishment protocols." Strange grimaced. "I'm not resisting, I'm redirecting. Big difference." The knights surged again, teleportation flashes flickering as they attempted to flank him. Strange had faced speedsters, time manipulators, sorcerers, and gods. He anticipated the teleports by milliseconds, weaving dimensional distortions that caused the knights to reappear several steps off target. They were skilled, unyielding, focused. but they had never fought someone whose power flowed from an entirely different metaphysical system. One knight hurled a psychic bolt infused with pure faith. It struck Strange's ward and caused the sigil to distort. Strange blinked, genuinely surprised. "Your magic reacts to belief." The knight charged. "Faith is our shield. Faith is our weapon." Strange nodded to himself. Fascinating and dangerous. With the flick of his wrist, he created a mirror dimension fracture, a harmless prison of refracted space. The knight slammed into it, trapped inside shimmering, reflective geometry. Strange raised his voice. "Please stop attacking. I do not wish to harm any of you." The leader roared back, "Then submit." Strange shook his head. "I didn't even submit to Dormammu. What makes you think I'll kneel to you?" He raised his hands, not in aggression, but in declaration. A wave of harmonic energy expanded outward, a spell of clarity. It washed over the plaza, stabilizing the air, dousing psychic fury, calming panic. And for the first time, the knights hesitated. Strange took the opening. "Let me speak with someone who sees beyond violence, someone who can evaluate without fear." The leader paused. His psychic senses stretched towards Strange again, analyzing, weighing. Then he sent a brief, encrypted burst over the Vox. After a tense moment, he lowered his halberd. "The Inquisition has been notified." Strange arched a brow. "Is that good or bad?" The knight replied, "It is inevitable." Above them, storm clouds roiled. A ship descended, black, angular, bearing the sigils of the Ordo Malleus. Dr. Strange realized his true test had just begun, because the warp was not done with him, and neither was the Imperium. The warp shifted as if taking a single, unified breath. Every current, every psychic wave, every drifting nightmare seemed to twist in a new direction. Even the entities that roamed the Immaterium hesitated. Something had entered their domain that did not belong. An intruder shaped by laws older and harsher than mortal minds. That presence was still small by warp standards, but it was ordered, stable, and resonant with power not drawn from emotion. This made it an offense to the very substance of chaos. Across the Immaterium, 4 vast intelligences reacted. The first stirred in violent repulsion. Khorne, the embodiment of rage and slaughter, sensed Dr. Strange's refusal to embrace destruction. Every barrier of protection he erected, every measured step he took, and every refusal to kill was an insult. Khorne's realm trembled, and rivers of boiling blood surged against stone fortresses formed from skulls of forgotten wars. Strange's shield magic burned with a clean, structured brilliance that enraged this god, because structure was the opposite of slaughter. The second watched with a calculating patience. Tzeentch regarded Strange as a priceless anomaly. Here was a sorcerer able to shape reality through systems unrelated to the warp. A being who could cast without feeding chaos. Tzeentch understood instantly that Strange's magic threatened to introduce new patterns into the Immaterium. Patterns meant structure, and structure weakened unpredictability. The Changer of Ways began weaving counter-schemes. Threads of fate jerked, snapping into new lines as hundreds of demons were dispatched to test Strange's limits.
The third extended a rotting hand. Nurgle felt Strange's presence like a breeze in an ancient, stagnant garden. His power resisted decay, illness, stagnation, and despair. It radiated a form of order that Nurgle found distasteful. He preferred beings that broke slowly under the inevitability of entropy. Strange glowed too brightly, too cleanly. Nurgle's garden shuddered, and plagues took new shapes meant to corrode sanctorum-level magical integrity. The fourth leaned closer with insidious delight. Slaanesh admired the discipline Strange showed. Mortals who carry great power without giving in to excess were tempting prizes. His mind was stable, focused, trained, characteristics Slaanesh saw as a challenge. Strange's self-control shone like a rare gem, and Slaanesh desired to fracture it, to distort it, until it spiraled into indulgent obsession or spiritual collapse. Waves of psychic seduction rippled outward, seeking weaknesses. These reactions reached across the galaxy like storms. Dr. Strange felt them as a pressure rising inside the warp currents. The weight of ancient attention tightened around him, as if the Immaterium had placed him under a lens. From that moment, nothing in the galaxy would leave him alone. He became a gravitational center for danger. Demons manifested near him, even in real space, because the Chaos Gods wanted to analyze him, corrupt him, or annihilate him. The Eldar noticed this shift long before the Imperium did. Their farseers sensed warped ripples in probability. The skein trembled around points connected to this new being, forming patterns unseen for millennia. On Craftworld Ultway, a cluster of seers performed joint trance rituals to understand the intruder. What they witnessed was alarming. Webs of fate coiling around a figure outside the natural lines of the 41st millennium. Someone not born of this galaxy. Someone who shaped reality with unfamiliar principles. They reached out through indirect psychic pathways, entering dreams, astral pockets, and resonance pockets. Eventually, their presence brushed against Strange, who perceived their approach not as voices, but as geometric shifts in the astral plane. Their intentions were cautious, their movements precise, and their fear genuine. They showed glimpses of a fractured galaxy where the warp dictated the survival of entire species. They revealed their battles against She Who Thirsts and the price of every mistake. Strange understood. The Eldar were not allies by nature, but they were desperate survivors with accurate knowledge of the warp. He accepted their guidance, not through words, but through shared visions. Through them, he saw countless futures collapsing into ruin if the warp remained in its current state. He saw how the Chaos Gods fed on emotion, how they shaped reality from suffering, and how every psychic species, unintentionally.
He also saw something else. The warp was reacting more aggressively wherever he traveled. His arcane energy, rooted in the Vishanti and other Marvel cosmic sources, introduced ordered disturbances into the Immaterium. These disturbances weakened chaos influence locally, causing demonic manifestations to fluctuate. Warp storms shrank and expanded erratically near him. This instability was dangerous for every faction dependent on warp travel. His presence alone could shift the equilibrium of the galaxy. The Eldar realized this first. They guided Strange toward isolated regions, encouraging him to keep moving to avoid destabilizing key sectors. Strange complied, sensing the danger of remaining in any one system for too long. His journey took him across barren worlds, forgotten imperial ruins, and abandoned orbital stations. Everywhere he went, demonic manifestations increased in intensity. They hunted him like predators, chasing a spark of reality that threatened their domain. Strange fought them without destruction, forcing them back into the warp using containment spells, dimensional binds, and astral suppression fields. His attacks were precise, calculated, and controlled. This made him even more dangerous in the eyes of chaos. Each victory strengthened the belief among demons that he was not a mortal intruder, but a structured cosmic anomaly. News of his battles spread unevenly across the Imperium. Some worlds believed an angelic protector had arrived. Others feared a new class of warp entity. Inquisitors opened sealed texts, interpreting these events as heresy or omen. Grey Knights noticed fluctuations in demon presence across several war zones and connected them to an unknown localized anomaly. Suspicion and fear grew. But the Chaos Gods grew angrier. Khorne's rage intensified. Tzeentch wove more elaborate traps. Nurgle cultivated plagues designed to corrode magical structure. Slaanesh sent psychic torrents aimed at cracking Strange's discipline. Their collective pressure bent warp currents against him, intending to break him before he became a permanent threat. The galaxy was shifting, and Strange stood at its center.
Dr. Strange learned quickly that every action he took in the 41st Millennium carried weight far beyond what he intended. His attempts to protect isolated worlds created ripples through the warp, and those ripples altered how entire civilizations operated. Demons pursued him more aggressively. Imperial forces fired upon him without hesitation. Eldar seers tracked his location with anxious precision. His presence altered fate lines wherever he traveled, and the galaxy reacted with a kind of instinctive fear. The warp had begun to twist unnaturally. Storms moved in patterns that defied their own chaotic rules. Psychic anomalies formed around each location Strange visited, then dissipated when he left. This instability suggested a new rule was trying to anchor itself amid the currents, and that rule did not originate from chaos. It came from Strange's structured, disciplined, arcane nature, something the warp rejected violently. Strange understood his precarious position. His magic was not native to the galaxy, and the principles behind it disrupted psychic ecology. He needed a strategy to minimize his impact while protecting the innocent lives scattered across the Imperium. He searched for worlds with minimal psychic traffic, wandering between desolate frontiers and forgotten installations that no faction bothered to control. On one such world, partially consumed by past conflict, Strange noticed a pattern emerging from the warp's behavior. The Immaterium recoiled from certain combinations of arcane energies, as though rejecting the introduction of stable frameworks. This observation sparked the beginnings of an idea. If his magic could generate zones that repelled chaotic disturbances, perhaps he could design larger structures capable of anchoring reality. These anchors of stability would not erase the warp, but could suppress demonic manifestations long enough to protect vulnerable populations. He escaped before they could encircle him, but the encounter left him uneasy. The galaxy's most technologically advanced human faction was now aware of his existence, and their curiosity rivaled their zealotry. Their pursuit might become relentless.
Yet the Mechanicus was not the only faction that perceived his experiments. Deep beneath a tomb world on the edge of the sector, ancient sensors stirred. Necron machines, built to detect disturbances in the fabric of reality, registered Strange's anchors as violations. To the Necrons, the warp was a hated enemy, and anything that manipulated the Immaterium, whether to strengthen or weaken it, was considered a threat to universal stability. An overlord awakened in a silent chamber of jade and obsidian. His consciousness spread through his dynasty's systems, assessing the anomaly. Strange's structured magic was not psychic energy. It did not mesh with the known laws of the galaxy. It did not resemble technology or sorcery familiar to the Necrons. It was an unknown variable with unpredictable effects. Unknown variables were unacceptable. The Necron dynasty mobilized. Cold metallic constructs rose from their tombs, forming spearheads designed to intercept the anomaly. Their movements were efficient, unburdened by emotion or fear. The Overlord concluded that the only logical response was eradication. No negotiation, no examination, immediate elimination. Strange confronted the Necrons on a barren plateau scarred by ancient orbital strikes. The sky above shimmered with the faint remains of the last warp disturbance he had stabilized. Necron warriors advanced in perfect unison, energy weapons glowing with cold precision. Strange's shields absorbed their relentless volleys, but each impact reverberated across his arcane systems. Necron weaponry did not behave like traditional energies. It shredded molecular structure, bypassing magical protections in subtle, corrosive ways. Strange countered with containment spells, transmutation barriers, and dimensional folds that redirected fire. The Necrons adapted quickly, altering frequencies and formation patterns. One construct teleported behind him, triggering a burst of chronometric disruption that threatened to collapse his spell work. Strange retaliated with a wide arc of eldritch force that sent the construct sliding across the cracked terrain. He realized then that this was not a battle he could win decisively. The Necrons were persistent, tireless, and relentlessly logical. If he continued to fight, the dynasty would escalate to catastrophic force, and if he destroyed too many of them, he risked destabilizing the region further. He retreated, teleporting across dimensional layers until he reached a pocket of calmer space. But the encounter left him troubled. His efforts to protect the galaxy were now drawing hostility not only from Chaos and the Imperium, but also from ancient civilizations that had once warred to eradicate the warp entirely. Strange saw clearly what most could not. Every faction misunderstood him. Some wanted to control him, others wanted to destroy him. All feared him. And he had brought this upon himself simply by existing here. He understood now that the path ahead would require sacrifice. If he truly intended to protect this galaxy, he would have to make decisions no one here was capable of making. He would have to bear the burden alone. And somewhere deep within the warp, the four who watch grew restless. Their combined attention twisted the fabric of the Immaterium as they prepared to intervene directly. The galaxy braced for what came next.
The warp tightened around the 41st millennium like a closing fist. Across countless systems, psychers collapsed without warning, screaming visions of impossible storms twisting through the Immaterium. Astropaths felt pressure building in psychic space, as if the galaxy itself was inhaling. Eldar farseers sensed strands of fate vibrating in unnatural patterns. Even Necron cryptex detected distortions rippling through higher dimensions, disturbances that broke the cold logic of their calculations. Something vast was stirring. Dr. Strange had been tracking the changes ever since the Necron and Mechanicus conflicts forced him into deeper isolation. He wandered through empty sectors, drifting between abandoned moons and fractured star systems, searching for places where his influence caused the least disruption. But no matter how far he moved, the warp followed him like a shadow. Chaos refused to let him vanish. His mere presence inflicted order upon an ocean that despised structure. The pressure growing around him was not random. It was focused, directed. The Chaos Gods were moving. Strange felt their attention like 4 colossal storms converging on a single point. They had tested him through demons, manipulated factions against him, and twisted warp currents into traps. All had failed. His magic was foreign, resilient, resistant to corruption. So the Chaos Gods chose a final strategy: direct manifestation. Strange stood on a dead world, scarred by battles older than human memory. Cracked obsidian plains stretched under a crimson sky, where the auroras of a raging warp storm drifted like luminous serpents. The Immaterium thinned around him, creating a zone where reality bent inward. Pressure increased, temperature shifted, and the ground trembled as though preparing to split. Then the sky broke. 4 vortexes tore open above the atmosphere, each radiating a different emotional force. Rage poured from the first, sorrow and decay from the second, manic ecstasy from the third, and spiraling arcs of impossible possibility from the fourth. These energies flowed downward, intertwining into a single monstrous presence as a colossal avatar formed, a fusion of traits representing every Chaos God. The being stepped onto the cracked ground with a weight that made the planet groan. Its form shifted constantly, never the same shape twice, blending metal, flesh, bone, shadow, and flame. It towered over the landscape, an expression of the Immaterium's hatred for the stranger who challenged its dominion. Strange steadied himself, his cloak wrapped around him like a guardian spirit. The eye of Agamotto flared with a trembling light, fighting against the pressure of the warp storm surrounding him. He did not raise his voice because he needed none. His will alone formed the shield that stood between him and annihilation. The avatar advanced. The air split as it moved, releasing waves of destructive force. The ground shattered in its wake. Strange countered with arcs of eldritch construct magic, redirecting the collapsing energy into dimensional sink pockets. The first impact sent shockwaves across the entire continent, obliterating ancient ruins buried beneath the surface. The avatar struck again, releasing corrosive warp fire. Strange dispersed it using precision spellwork, weaving counter-energies drawn from cosmic principles beyond the Immaterium's understanding. But each spell cost him. The warp fought back, trying to infect the structure of his magic, bending it, warping it, undermining its stability. Strange felt the weight of the 4 Chaos Gods pushing against him, their combined hostility threatening to crush his mind. He retaliated with spells of binding, summoning geometric restraints that forced the avatar's body to fracture into abstract segments. This held for mere moments before the avatar reformed, stronger and more unstable than before. Strange shifted again, anchoring himself between dimensional layers to avoid total collapse. Even as he fought, he realized the truth. He could not destroy the Chaos Gods. They were not beings in the traditional sense. They were forces of nature shaped by emotion.
Destroying them would require destroying the very minds that created them, an act that would be genocide on a scale beyond comprehension. He needed a different solution, one that preserved life instead of extinguishing it. Strange rose into the air, summoning the totality of his remaining power. He reached into the threads of arcane law that governed his magic. Through the eye of Agamotto, he glimpsed a path, painful, dangerous, but possible. He could not seal the warp entirely. That would collapse psychic ecosystems, cripple the Imperium, annihilate countless species dependent on warp navigation, and destabilize reality itself. But he could weaken chaos. He could create a barrier, not absolute but layered, a partial seal, reinforcing the Immaterium, reducing warp bleed, and limiting how easily demons manifested. 1,000 smaller seals aligned into a network of arcane safeguards. A lattice of arcane protection stretched across sectors, anchored by his presence. But the cost would be immense. Strange felt his life force burning as he channeled magic through the eye of Agamotto. The artifact pulsed violently, resisting the warp's attempt to twist its inner mechanisms. Strange forced it open, releasing a torrent of structured cosmic light into the sky. The avatar roared as the light engulfed it, tearing through its ever-shifting form. The warp storm spiraled upward, dragging half the planet's atmosphere with it. Across the galaxy, psychers collapsed as the Immaterium convulsed. Whole star systems flickered as warp routes shifted. Daemonic incursions ceased abruptly mid-manifestation. Navigators blinked in confusion as currents calmed, settling into patterns not seen in thousands of years.
Strange held the spell until his strength began to collapse. His vision blurred, his breathing slowed, his arcane supply drained near zero. The barrier snapped into place with a shock wave of cosmic resonance that rippled across the galaxy. The avatar dissolved, torn apart by the stabilizing lattice. Warp storms shrank, chaos howled in fury, but the seal held. Strange landed on the shattered ground, barely conscious. His magic flickered, diminished but not extinguished. He looked up at the sky, now calmer, quieter, and knew the galaxy had changed. The Imperium did not know who saved them. The Eldar sensed a new pattern of hope. The Necrons recalculated their models of universal equilibrium. And the Chaos Gods, deep within their realms, turned their infinite hatred toward a single name. Dr. Strange had become a threat they could never ignore. The 41st Millennium did not understand what had happened, yet every faction felt the change. The warp no longer roared with uncontrolled violence. Daemonic incursions became rarer and less stable, flickering like weakened shadows instead of flooding entire worlds. Warp storms shrank to half their former size, and for the first time in centuries, astropaths reported moments of clarity instead of endless nightmares. It was as if a pressure long accepted as eternal had finally eased. Imperial commanders interpreted the shift as divine intervention. Ecclesiarchs announced new proclamations claiming the God Emperor had tightened his grip on the Immaterium. Scholars argued quietly that the phenomenon was unprecedented, beyond even the Emperor's recorded feats. Inquisitors launched secret investigations to uncover the cause, chasing rumors of a cloaked figure who had appeared at the edges of war zones and vanished without trace. None found answers, only fragments. The Eldar, however, understood more than most. Their farseers traced the lattice of stability Strange had woven across the galaxy. They recognized the pattern as foreign, a design built from principles not linked to psychic will. Though they continued their fight against She Who Thirsts, they did so with a newfound sense of possibility.
For the first time in many millennia, the skein displayed faint strands where doom was not the only outcome. Strange had not saved them, but he had given them breathing room. The Necron studied the change with cold logic. The immaterial's volatility had decreased, reducing the threat of galactic collapse and making real space marginally more stable. Yet the barrier Strange created was not technological nor fully natural. It defied categorization. Some dynasties viewed it as a temporary advantage. Others saw it as a threat to be eliminated. Their calculations adjusted, but their interest in the mysterious anomaly only deepened. Meanwhile, in the Immaterium, the Chaos Gods raged. Their influence was diminished, not destroyed, but weakened enough to wound their pride. Strange had not challenged their existence. He had challenged their authority, and for that they marked him. Across the warp, demons whispered his name as both insult and fear. As for Dr. Strange, he continued to wander the galaxy, recovering slowly. His power was not gone, merely strained. His burden had become permanent. He could no longer return home, and he could no longer fade into obscurity. The galaxy needed him now, whether it realized it or not. He had become its guardian, unwanted, unrecognized, but absolutely necessary. And somewhere in the shifting quiet of the warp, Strange sensed the beginning of the next threat. Because in the 41st millennium, peace, like magic, always came with a cost.